Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenmann and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann. And today we are thrilled beyond belief. Ike and I have spoken about our guest before. He starred in one of our favorite shows, which is consistently ranked on one of the list of the greatest sitcoms of all time. He's legendary actor, sitcom royalty, star of stage, TV, and the beloved sitcom Barney Miller, and a fellow New Yorker. Please welcome Hal Linden. Hal, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure, sir. Pleasure.
Before we get to Barney Miller, which we will, you grew up in New York. I'm from Brooklyn. You were in the Bronx, which was foreign territory to me. Did you grow up wanting to be in theater and have a desire to perform?
I never had the slightest interest in theater. Grew up in New York. I didn't even go to the theater. I had a strange career. I'm very old, so the years shouldn't shock you. I joined the music. I was a professional musician.
Right.
I was a classically trained clarinet player, and in high school I started playing the saxophone as well. I joined the Musicians Union at the age of 15.
Oh, impressive.
That was because there was nobody to play. Everybody was in the Army still. So I became a band leader at the age of 15.
Incredible.
I went right through high school and college and made a fine living as a professional musician. That was what I thought I was going to be. It wasn't until I was drafted in the Army. I played in an Army band, and this was during the Korean War.
Mm-hmm.
After college, I was drafted, and in the band, I used to play the weekends at the Officers Club and the Service Club. And the piano player who played with me used to get borrowed by special services. They did not have their own piano player. So every time they wanted to do a show, they would borrow him. And one day, he just turned to me and said, "Hey, you want to sing a song in the show? I'll have him borrow you too." I was also, the boy singer in all the bands I played in. And those were some relatively well-known bands. There's a name Bobby Sherwood or Ray McKinley. These were all the top band leaders of the 40s and early 50s.
And Sammy Kaye, I read, right.
So I was... on a lark, I went along with him, and that was the first time I ever stepped on a stage, and it appealed to me. So when I got back out of service, the musical world had changed violently. When I was drafted, there was Stan Kenton and Woody Herman, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Billy May. It was the height of the big band era. And when I got out, they were all gone. And it was Bill Haley and the Comets. And that was a musical change that was a shock to me. So I said, well, I'll give this acting thing a shot. and that's as cavalierly as I got into the acting business.
So that's how you got in. Wow. So that I was also wanted to touch upon.
Fascinating.
When you went,
yes. The thing that has fascinated me my whole life is he asked me. I didn't ask him. What if he didn't ask me?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you talk about an inciting incident that you had nothing to do with. It's like absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
That puts my whole career in perspective.
So how did you get involved in Broadway after that?
I went to, I started, somebody told me how to look for auditions for summer stock. And I went to my very first audition and got it for the chorus in summer stock. Probably I wasn't that great a singer. I was a good singer, but I wasn't that great a singer. But because I was a musician, I read music. And that might have been the tipping factor. The conductor was an old musical comedy and opera conductor in New York, and I think he was impressed by the fact that I could read music, and that's how I got my first job. We did 10 musical comedies in 12 weeks.
Wow.
That means you're rehearsing one musical comedy by day and performing one by night. And so by the time the first summer was over, I had all this experience under my belt and slipped and started auditioning for the Broadway theater. That was it.
So you started doing.
It sounds like a grueling schedule. My gosh. I mean, I'm sure it was great fun. It had to have been great fun.
Oh, it was sensational.
Yeah.
There were 6 singing girls and 3 dancing girls. Choose one. Summer stock.
There it is. Yes, there it is.
So you did a lot of understudy work for a while, and then I read your first role on Broadway was in one of my favorite musicals, Bells Are Ringing, with the great Judy Holliday.
And that was also a kind of accident, if you will. Actually, one of the girls from Summer Stock became my girlfriend, and she was in Bells Are Ringing. I was in another season of Summer Stock a year or 2 later, and she's the one she went to the stage where the understudy was leaving. The standby. He was a standby. There's a difference. Standby is not in the show. Standby, that's his only job, is to stand by for the lead. So they were going to go down to an understudy, and she cornered the stage manager and said, "I have somebody I think would be perfect for the job." I drove all the way into New York to audition for the stage manager before I could audition for the auditioner, because I didn't even have an agent.
Wow.
And about 4 or 5 auditions later, including one for Judy Holliday, because she had to okay me, I got the job on a Saturday afternoon between shows. I auditioned for her. At the time, I was singing with the chorus on the Perry Como show.
Wow.
I was a Ray Charles singer, and this is not that Ray Charles, the other Ray Charles, who said, "Not the blind one, the deaf one."
Oh,
that was his description of himself. Anyway, between shows, we had rehearsed all afternoon, had our dinner break, about to do the Perry Como show on a Saturday night. In between shows, I went to the Schubert Theater, auditioned for Judy, got the job, went back, did the Perry Como show.
Wow.
Got in my car, drove to Long Island, and played a bar mitzvah on the saxophone.
Wow.
On Monday morning, I went into rehearsal with the stage manager and a book. I had seen it many times because, as I said, the girl in the show was my girlfriend. Later to be my wife for 52 years.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, on Saturday, the following Saturday, was the first understudy rehearsal, and right in the middle of it, they came. This was at the time of the Asian flu, the first Asian flu epidemic in New York, and stage manager came out and said, "Keep rehearsing because you're on this afternoon."
Oh, wow.
I made my Broadway debut 6 days later, and ended up. I never went into the show. Never became an understudy. They changed the contract to standby. So I was with that show as standby, and then I acceded to the role when Sidney Chaplin left. That didn't exactly spur a big Broadway career, but it made me, quote, the standby of Broadway. So for the next
Yeah.
8 years,
Wow.
basically, I must have done about 7 Broadway shows, all standing by for the male lead. It wasn't until, well, almost about 8 years later that I finally started to get roles, as well as standing by, and created a Broadway career.
And what was Judy Holliday like working with?
Probably the most, I didn't realize it at the time, the most generous actress I think I've ever worked with. I'll tell you a story. The song Just in Time, the classic Just in Time, was done in one. That is, the curtain, one of the curtains was down. There was only the stage was only about 6 feet wide because they were changing scenery behind it. And the staging was, we were on the way to a party. I was taking her to a party to meet my friends. And I start to sing Just in Time, and we dance across the stage. So I took her in dance position. I started dancing across the stage, basically singing in her ear. Now understand, this is from a Broadway stage. So and there were no microphones in those days. So it was, I still had to hit the back wall singing in her ear. And I'm dancing. I got about 8 bars in when I felt her hand on my back twisting me so that we went out. This. And I finally realized, I was a little shocked, but I realized she was turning me so that my face was toward the audience. So that she was upstage, so that the audience could hear me better and see me better. Now, she was the star of the show, not me. But that kind of generosity and understanding of what a play is about, that it indeed was my moment. So she gave me the stage, and she did that for everybody in the show. She was, and that's the word I would say, generous.
Gracious, generous, right? No, she seems it. So she was basically what you see on her roles. So
yeah.
Yes. So at the time,
excuse me. No, she was known as the ditzy blonde. She was the most brilliant woman, one of the most brilliant women I've ever known. What was the game that? I guess it was the beginning of. What was the game where you picked tiles? I remember, for letters and made words.
Scrabble.
Scrabble. You're right. Scrabble. That was the beginning of Scrabble. You could not touch her in Scrabble. She was brilliant. She was a brilliant intellectual woman who had who kind of had this reputation of being a dumb blonde on her back. And it carried through right to the end of her career. I think she never kicked that picture.
Yeah. That while you were in the play, is that when the talk started to make the movie as well, while you were still doing the play?
No, the movie was made. We actually went on the road after the show closed in New York. We did a small road tour and ended up on the West Coast. And she was scheduled to do the movie after we closed the show. And she asked me to stay on the West Coast, and I did a different part. some guy named Dean Martin played my part.
I think I've heard of him too. Yeah.
But but they wrote a little extra part, a nightclub singer, and so I stayed in California and did that part in the picture.
I just watched the movie again recently. I love the movie, and you're barely recognizable without the mustache.
That's true. Free mustache.
So now I have to ask though, who did the role better? Come on, you were Dean. so,
I'll pass on that one.
Okay.
Although, believe me, there's nothing I could say to harm his career.
Exactly. So afterwards, you were in Wildcat with Lucille Ball. So what was that experience like, and your memories of that show?
Well, actually, Lucy had seen that production of Bells Are Ringing in California, and we became friends after that. She wanted actually she hired my wife to do something called the Desilu Review. So we stayed in California after the show closed, and my wife was in the Desilu Review at Desilu. So a little while later, the part of the boss, what do you call him? The drill boss in Wildcat opened up, and I went in and did and replaced in that, and was back on Broadway with Lucy. It was her Broadway debut. It was an unfortunate one. She didn't. I guess the expectation was Lucille Ball was going to come to Broadway and conquer Broadway after she had conquered television. Unfortunately, Wildcat did not get those good reviews. She actually got ill and the show closed. I don't remember how long it lasted. Not very long.
And how was she as to work with?
I didn't have any scenes with her in that show. Oh, yes, we did. Yeah, there was one where all of us had a scene with her. How do I put this? I don't think Lucy had the Broadway discipline. So there was a little kidding around going on all the time, bits being thrown in, which really turned off the Broadway
audience.
No, not the Broadway audience. The audience loved her. Those of us who grew up on Broadway and knew the rules, and the play was the thing for us, not fooling around,
Right.
So there were in my lifetime a couple of people who came from Hollywood who kind of were never accepted on Broadway because they didn't play by the rules.
So you went into, I saw you have a couple of other shows, The Education. Well, more than a couple, yes. Yeah. The Education of Hyman Kaplan was one of your next big ones.
The thing about you said I was the standby on Broadway. I was. Even in Wildcat, I played the crew chief, the crew boss, but I understudied the lead, the male lead. When I did Hyman Kaplan, I got the part as the villain, but I still was the standby for, believe it or not, Tom Bosley. Can you picture me standing by for Tom Bosley?
Oh, wow.
Yes. It was a way of saving money. Producers loved it. They would give me a small part, and then I'd have Hal Linden as the standby. Later on, I replaced Larry Blyden in The Apple Tree, and it was at the end of the run, and they were trying to save money. And because I got Larry's part, the guy who was standing by for both of them quit. So the deal was, I played Larry Blyden's part, and I had to stand by for Alan Alda.
Oh, wow.
It was getting to be a little annoying to me, but I needed it was a good part. I wasn't about to turn it down. So I took the deal, but I insisted on Larry Blyden's billing. And Larry Blyden had over the title star billing along with Alan Alda. If there is such a thing as a listing in the book of records, what's the
Guinness Book of Records?
Guinness Book of Records.
Yes.
I think I'm probably the only understudy with star billing in the history of the game. Had to be.
Wow.
Wow. So the Rothschilds was your first lead?
Hang on a second. I got one story about Hyman Kaplan.
Okay.
Again, I had been the standby looking to make my own name on Broadway. And I had this part, I was the villain. The part was only 8 minutes long, but it was dynamite. It was anything you want. I had one number, and it was as close as I ever came to a showstopper in my entire career. You know, they don't have showstoppers anymore because they don't build the shows that way. They're at the end of the scene and that goes on, you're going to applaud. In the old days, if it came in the middle of a scene, the audience would actually physically stop the show. You had to do an encore to keep the show going. In any case, opening night, I really figured this was going to be it. This was going to at least put me on the map on Broadway, get me out of the understudy business. I go on, I do the number, and it ends with polite applause, and a little buzzing in the audience. I couldn't, like they were talking. It was the opening number of the second act. That I remember. And I staggered off stage. I said to myself, you've blown it. You had your chance. And what did you do? As far as I knew, I did the number the same way I'd always done it, but I couldn't believe it. It was nothing. I was going back to my dressing room. There was an elevator in that theater. I got in the elevator to go up to my dressing room, and the elevator operator said, "Did you hear what happened?" I said, "What happened? What?" Martin Luther King was assassinated.
Oh, wow.
They came in the intermission to get Mayor Lindsay out of the audience. He had to go up to Harlem because there are riots in Harlem. That's all the audience was talking about and thinking about.
Oh.
And here I come to do my big show-stopping number, and it dies.
Oh, wow.
Oh, gosh. That's incredible.
My life I thought that's it. That's going to change my whole life. Actually, it did, because the creators of the Rothschilds brought the director to see me in that show. Because they wanted me to, they were thinking of me to do the lead in the Rothschilds, which actually was the change that changed my life.
So the Rothschilds was pretty much done specifically for you.
I wouldn't say that, but Sheldon Harnick and I knew Sheldon for about a decade. When I did Anything Goes off Broadway, Sheldon was courting his wife for the rest of his life, Margie Gray. And so he saw the Rothschild, he saw me in Anything Goes probably 50 times. So we were very close, and he thought that I would be good for the Rothschilds. So he was he brought the director and everybody else to see me, and they did, and that's how I got the Rothschilds.
And you won the Tony for that one.
And that's what turned their life around.
Wow.
Now, by the way, that's 15 years from summer stock.
Wow. Incredible.
Absolutely. Gosh.
I did want to touch about a couple of your other roles before we get to the TV. This aspect of your career, I loved. You did the English dubbing for a couple of Godzilla movies. So, how did that come about?
Okay. As I said, for 8 or 9 years, I was the standby or understudy on Broadway. That's a nice, in those days, it was a nice check, enough. I raised 4 kids on the west side of Manhattan during that time. But you had to make a living, you know. When I wasn't in a show, I had to do something, and I did everything that you could possibly do. Backers auditions, demonstration records, industrial shows, and one of the things that I got into was looping, foreign film looping. In those days, if you remember correctly, well, you guys are too young. There was only 3 stations in New York. I
remember them.
3 networks in New York,
right.
but they had 2 independent stations, and independent stations had no product. They couldn't produce their own shows, so they used to buy European B pictures and loop them into English, and then you'd watch that on Channel 11 or Channel 5, or and that was the beginning of that business, and I got involved in that. And among the shows that I looped was Godzilla, but I also, I Am Curious Yellow. Do you remember that? That was the first Hornish picture to be.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes. The one about the Mozart one, I can't think of that. Not Amadeus. War and Peace. The Russian version of War and Peace.
Wow.
So I as I said, in the 60s, I did, I don't know, 8 Broadway shows, all understudy parts, and raised 4 kids on the west side of Manhattan. So I had to keep working. And so I was very big in the looping business, in the voiceover business, you name it, anything to make a living, to keep myself in the business. I specifically put the horn away because I didn't want to get sucked back into the music business and not be available for something on, in theater. So I didn't play my horn for 20 years.
Wow.
I now play it again.
I was going to ask you that eventually. I was hoping that would be your answer.
Well, it was an interesting thing. When I was Barney, I did a guest shot on the Captain and Tennille special, and we were sitting around, but they were talking about what they wanted me to do. There was a number they wanted me to do on the back of the paddle wheel, but he said, we're shooting it in New Orleans, and they were going to use the paddle wheel boat, and on the back of the boat, you sing this song. I said, okay, that's fine. I said, by the way, I used to play the clarinet, and I could probably get it back enough to play a little Dixieland if you want to do something, but they hired a Dixieland band without the clarinet player. And I had to go pick a tune and very quickly get that lid. So the song we picked was Muscat Ramble. It's an old Dixieland tune. And they rented a nightclub or a restaurant in the morning, covered the windows and put a lot of smoke in the air, looked like a nightclub. And while they're getting ready, I'm getting a little nervous here. I haven't played in 20 years, really, except for, preparing for this. So I grabbed the band in the back. I said, let's run that quickly again, make sure we got it, because I came in the night before. That's when I met the band and got their arrangement of Muscat Ramble, and I'm playing along with it. Everything's fine. We tried it again in the back. Okay, fine, ready to go. Okay, we're going to shoot it. We got up to shoot it. It was terrific. Terrific. Click, click, click. Hal, we weren't sure who was playing when, so let's do take 2. I think we got it now. Okay, second take. Terrific. Hal, let's do take 3. We missed a few shots. Okay, take 3. Take 7.
Oh.
Take 12.
Oh no.
Take 19.
Oh.
By the time we finished, I could hardly hold the clarinet in my mouth.
Oh dear.
But somewhere you go pick it up on YouTube or somewhere. I've seen it, and it's still sounds pretty good. Anyway, since then I kind of put it back. I did a concert act for many years, and I always played the clarinet. And I played with symphony orchestras. I would play a movement of the Mozart with symphony orchestras along the way. So I never really gave it up.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'd like to. How did you transition then from theater to go in? You were a lot of guest spots on TV. I saw like Car 54. Where Are You? The FBI. So how did you go from theater, guest star on other shows to landing your own sitcom with Barney Miller?
Well, it was actually the 3rd pilot I'd made. The Tony Award got a lot of attention, and I did a pilot in New York, and I did a pilot in California, and neither one sold. I was doing a guest shot in California when my manager called and said, this guy wants to talk to you about doing a pilot. So I stayed for lunch, and that was Danny Arnold, who created Barney Miller. I never auditioned for it. He had seen The Rothschild. And when when you do a pilot, the network gives you a list of everybody to play every part, people that they would accept. And Danny said, no, I've seen this actor on Broadway, I'm going to use him. And that was it. Now, I had 2 other offers the same year for 2 other pilots. They were hour shows. My choice of Barney Miller, actually a little mistaken, and very cavalier. I assumed that my experience on Broadway would help me do a sitcom in front of an audience, as opposed to an hour show, which is, just no audience. And that's why one of the reasons I chose Barney, because it was going to be in front of an audience. Barney Miller, the first Barney Miller pilot did not sell. And somehow about 8 months later, I got a call. He wanted to do 2 more episodes. The network agreed to do 2 more episodes. Because the first Barney Miller pilot was called The Life and Times of Barney Miller. And it was basically half in the station house. Right. And half at home, the home life of a police officer. The network loved the precinct stuff, but the home stuff was what? Life with Father, like every other family sitcom. So he convinced them to make 2 more pilots, which would be only the precinct. I, at the time, had an offer to do a Broadway musical. So what do? Do you go for a year's work, or at least, even a bomb is 6 weeks rehearsal, 6 weeks on the road, 8 weeks on the road. It's half a year's work. This was for 2 pilots of a dead, 2 episodes of a dead pilot. So it was. I used the word cavalier because there was a deadline. The producer of the Broadway show had to have an answer at 5 o'clock that night, and there I was sitting in my manager's office, and he said, "Make your mind up, kid."
Oh wow, jeez.
And here is the answer. Well, we did Broadway. Let's try television. That's how cavalier it was. And we went out and did the episodes of Barney, and of course it went on the air. And by the way, I was quickly dissuaded from my impression that it was going to be helpful to have been a Broadway actor. You have to ignore the audience in television. You have to specifically block them out so that you can stay with the relationship on camera. It was the first, maybe the first show we were shooting when the cameraman said, "Over here, not out there."
Wow. So Rolling Stone, I just went back and looked. Rolling Stone had a list this year of the top sitcoms of all time. And now, over 40 years later, Barney Miller is still in their top 50. Did you right away think this was a special sitcom? Like, when did you first start thinking this was going to be one of the good ones?
I was not a student of sitcoms. I was not a student of television, quite honestly. I never saw, even as a musician, I was always working Saturday night. I never saw Jackie Gleason because I was always working on a Saturday night. So I had very little insight into what made a good television show. The only cop sitcom I knew was Car 54, Where Are You?, which was a very blatant and direct comedy. It didn't make any bones about being realistic. Where this show was specifically realistic. We used to come up with funny things in rehearsal, and when Danny saw it, he would say, "No." And his rule of thumb was, well, speaking now of the officers, not the people who got arrested. They could be as crazy as possible, or not the complainers, but the cops. He said, ask yourself this every time you think of a bit. Would you go for help to an officer who behaves like that? We had to be straight as an arrow. No, shtick, nothing.
So
and it was 8 years of straight. We could have foibles. We could have, Harris's ego, and everybody had a little foible. Mine was I was embarrassed that I had to wear reading glasses and things like that. Just a little, but shtick out.
I've been watching in anticipation of you coming on. I've gone back and watched, a lot of the episodes, and I noticed, the first season is very different from later. I mean, like you mentioned, had the split with the home life and the. They
tried to keep it.
Right.
They tried to keep referring to it, but it didn't work.
So this came from the network?
You're absolutely right. Very different, but there are many reasons for that. One, when you establish something in the first 2 years, for instance, you don't have to keep establishing it for the next 6. So I, at one point, as I said, I had a concert act that I did for 50 years. And I always had an opening act. And one year we decided to do a clip show as my opening act. So I had to sit down and find clips to make a clip show. They all came from the first 2 years because you had the beginning of the joke, you had the middle, and you had the end of the joke in one show. Later on, the beginning of the joke, everybody knew. So it was very hard to pick a clip. By the way, I sat and watched them in my own house and made the notes. I watched every one of the 162 episodes. I just could not turn, and at 2:00 in the morning, it was always one more. I'll watch one more and one more. That's all, one more. I can tell you this: Barney Miller was an independent production. Now, how does that change it? There was nobody there with a stopwatch. Nobody there from the network, from the studio to say, we're going on golden time, guys. You'll have 1 hour, then you got to be finished. There was no, and you find that on every other studio show. Danny Arnold was convinced the only rationale for making Barney Miller was to make the best it could be. And he was a perfectionist. We would very often start shooting a show. We ended up, by the way, without an audience because he was still working on the end of the show. We couldn't do it in front of an audience. So most of Barney Miller, certainly the last 7 years or so, 7.5, I think we only did about 5 or 6 shows in front of an audience. Were done without an audience so that he could control it. So that he could do it the way he wanted and make sure that it was right. And in 8 seasons, we never left an episode saying, we'll do better next week. Never. We were famous in Hollywood because we were the only show used to shoot till 3, 4 in the morning. Everybody else got out by midnight. We were there till 3, 4 and later.
Did you have on that show the typical sitcom production schedule where you start with the table read on, let's just say Monday, and then develop the show and then have your shoot day or 2 shoot days? Kind of, how did that spill out?
What happened was, yes, originally it was Monday to Friday. That was most of the like most shows. You do 3 days of rehearsal, 1 day of blocking, and then 2 shows for an audience. And we did that for, as I say, the first 4 or 5 or 6 shows. But then we didn't have the end of the script because Danny was still working on it. They had to cancel the audience. And once you cancel an audience, I mean, the audience people said, you can't do that. They came all the way from Iowa to see the show. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So you got to tell me now whether you're going to have an audience on Friday. And Danny said, we better not. So we never had an audience again, which meant that eventually we discovered there's no reason really to do the show as we would do it for an audience. Let's do it as a film in order, but scene by scene, repeat, fix whatever you want in the scene till it's right, and then go on to the next scene. The same way you would do a movie. Where the director has control of the scene, And so eventually we didn't even need a blocking day anymore because we would rehearse for 3 days, for 2 days. 2 days, mainly because we didn't have the end of the show yet.
Yeah.
And start shooting on Wednesday and shoot it like a film for 8 hours and come back on Thursday and keep going till generally 3 or 4 o'clock Thursday night. That was our schedule.
Well, that fascinates me because that's how the show always felt to me. It was very different than other sitcoms, and it had that a polished sense to it that I really appreciated. It's one of my favorite shows as well. I was always a huge fan, and I watched it growing up. And I have to say, I that just does fascinate me because I think that's part of what made it special, and it had a different tone. It had a different sense about it that was incredibly appealing.
One night there was a show in which Harris was shot at when he was by a uniformed police officer. Harris was chasing a perp down an alley when a uniformed police officer shot at him.
Mm.
A black man running down an alley with a gun. Okay, that was the beginning of the show that happened. The show was about our reaction to that. Harris was infuriated. Barney was trying to please everybody. The commissioner's office, all the cop unions, everybody, trying to calm everything down as Barney's function was. And Harris became infuriated about that I took it so lightly or didn't think that it was an outrageous, and walked out. At the end of the show, there was a scene where he comes back and we got together. We put okay. There was and in the scene, he kind of apologized for walking out and running, It was now 2, 3 o'clock in the morning because that's the end of the show, and we're about to shoot it. Or when we start to stage it, and Ron Glass, who played Harris, said, "What the hell am I apologizing for? I'm the guy who got shot at. Why should I apologize?" Now, understand, this is 1975, 6, 7, something like 77, something like that. I don't know. And everybody on the set, including me, said, because I had, when you play a part, you try to get into the part, and I saw the part as having to calm the situation down. I said, the man is absolutely right. So Danny came out. It must have been 2 a.m. That's expensive time.
Oh, yes. Oh, I understand.
Everybody.
Yes.
And we sat down around Harris's desk, that double desk there, and said, okay, what would happen? How would you handle it? And put together a scene where he didn't have to say, I remember one line was, "What if it happens again?" And it will, was my line, and it will.
Oh.
How do we handle it? We handle it the way we handle it now. We try to be professional, and we try to ameliorate the situation. But I mean, I'm not quoting the scene, right. But I'm telling you, it was created by the cast, by Harris actually, as to what would be an acceptable scene for him, that he didn't have to come back and say, "Okay, Barney, I'm sorry,"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At 2 o'clock in the morning,
yeah,
the cameramen were playing poker on golden time. And we were rewriting a scene. So you say it had a different quality. It sure did.
Mm-hmm.
It sure did. Because I've done other sitcoms, and there's never
it doesn't work like that. Yeah. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to do an episode of The Jeffersons back then, and and I still was at the same time very impressed how the cast did help drive, a lot of the way some scenes were shaped, because they knew the characters so well.
Oh,
It was extraordinary to watch. So I love hearing that kind of anecdote from your show.
That happened all the time. I mean, we did indeed become experts on our characters, and if a writer would write a line, we would say, I think it would work better this way, or and they were open to that. But it was only a question of accommodating the characters.
Speaking of the cast, I'd like to go into them. I mean, what a phenomenal cast! I mean, I look at the names here: Abe Vigoda, Ron Glass, Jack Sue, Max Gale, Gregory Sierra, Steve Landesberg. I mean, it was a very character-driven show. I mean, it wasn't constant setup punchline. The laughs came from the character and the situations. I look at it now, and like I said, I still enjoy the episodes now. I just want to know if you can go over a little bit of each one. If we could start with Abe Vigoda. I mean, I look at Abe Vigoda was like only 50, and he seems so old. He's the same age as I am now.
That's right. He was only about 8 years older than me. That's all. 6 years older, something like that. If you look at the original cast,
Mm-hmm.
there was not one comic in the cast. They were all actors who could play comedy, but they were all actors. It wasn't until Ronnie Carey was the first stand-up comic to be hired. And then, of course, Landesberg later on. But the show was never designed for comics. It was designed for actors who could recognize the comedic potential of a moment. And that was, I think, if you're looking for the secret of the casting, that was it. Jack Sue, if you remember, one episode of Barney Miller is a memorial to Jack Sue.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He actually died while we were shooting. He was in the hospital, and the word came down that he died. And there was a question of how to handle it. He had been, quote, at the DA's office on that chalkboard, but he was in the hospital with cancer. And when he died, what were we going to do? Just leave him at the DA's office, or we had to deal with it? There was a faction that suggested that he actually dies, that the character actually dies. We say that, I say that no, all this time he was not at the DA's office. He was in the hospital, and he died. And deal with our character's reaction to his death. That was my predilection, if you will. Then he said, I'll think about it. And we came in on Monday, and Danny was there with no script. Danny said, I don't want to trade on Jack Sue's death. I don't want to take advantage of his death. So what we're going to do is a clip show of Jack as Yamana. And I want each of you to come up with what you feel, how you felt about him. So that I'll put you on camera, and you can say whatever you want about him. And the whole show was shot around his desk. And everybody, Ron talked about him, and then they showed clips, and then Max talked about him, and then they showed clips, and that was the scene of the show. But the point is, we did it as actors, not as characters. So it was a much more personal show. I can tell you what I remember what I said. Mm-hmm. Jack Sue had been sent to Utah, the concentration camps we had in Utah.
The internment camps, right?
The internment camps.
Yeah.
He was there. The only way he got out of it was he joined the army and went and fought in World War II. But you never heard Jack being bitter about it. He was never bitter about it. He dealt with this horrific time in our past with humor. He approached it with humor. And that was this amazing thing to me, that I never saw anybody, because he had gone through, it was a terrible period in our political life, in our country's life. And he went through it. He was a victim of it. But he dealt with it with humor, never was bitter about it. I guess that's the only way you can be a comic.
I found he always had some tremendous comedic sensibilities. I mean, on Barney Miller, I remember the couple of guest spots on MASH he did. Always just very funny.
Jack was, again, I think he confronted a tough life with humor. So that was his modus operandi, was humor.
How about Ron Glass and Max Gale?
They were two. I said there were two pilots. We reshot the pilot when we did the thing because we had a different cast. The original cast was not Ron Glass, was not Max Gale, was not Jack Sue. It was only me and Abe were the only ones from the original cast. One of the reasons was it came up suddenly, and there were those people were not available. The original character that of Wojciechowicz was, I think it was called Stefanowski or something, a different Polish name, and quite honestly, was a Polish joke. Basically, was a Polish joke. He was supposed to be the Polish joke, but Max didn't see it that way. So he became, if you watched any of the shows, it was curiosity. Max was the most curious. He would investigate into every problem. So instead of a Polish joke, it became the most a positive picture of positive curiosity. I remember there was a script about the potential for if we had to evacuate New York, there were no plans. He's the one who came up with that. There were no plans. Nobody's done anything. Look what, and all of a sudden we had a show about the potential of that. I don't know. There was an atomic bomb thing or something. I can't remember. But he was the one who found out there are no plans. Nobody's made. And he turned what was a kind of a negative into a positive is what I'm saying, and made him this adorable, curious young man who had to investigate everything.
And Ron Glass?
Ron Glass, Ron was, they gave Ron this ego. He wrote that book, remember?
Right, yes.
So Ron had a little ego, I guess. Ron had a little ego, I guess. I saw Ron, as a matter of fact, believe it or not, we were up for the same part once, many years later, and it was just before he died. He died relatively young. Yeah. Unfortunately, they all died. It's me and Max, That's it.
How often do you go back and watch the show?
I don't. I don't. I've watched, as I said, all of them.
Right.
And we never saw the show because it was on Thursday at 8 o'clock, and we were shooting Thursday night. Now, the first time it went on the air, we did stop to watch it. And maybe the second week. After that, it was better, you know. So I didn't see Barney Miller until it was in syndication, basically.
Wow. That's, and I was going to ask you that because I thought, yeah, given the schedule, did you actually get to see the show, or was, you know, obviously then you were done with it by then, so it couldn't have been any, you know, you see anything you want to adjust or fix, you know?
There was never show anything again. Never show anything we would adjust or fix because we fixed it.
Yeah,
we took the time to fix it. I can't say that about everything I've ever done. We didn't take the time to fix it. It was done to a turn. We didn't till everybody was happy with it. We didn't move on.
I have to ask about something else that you were involved with. I mean, Ike and I have talked about this before too. You were on the first 2 seasons of one of my favorite shows, Battle of the Network Stars. How did you get involved in that? Did they approach you for that, or
probably the PR guy from the show? You know, come on, you got to do this. I was, first of all, I'm a terrible athlete. I got a dreadful athlete. I can't do anything. I'm an avid golfer, but a lousy golfer. You know, I'm not a. So that was the 2 activities. I knew how to ride a bike, so I was in the bike race, and I could hit a golf ball. So I got into that. And we all treated it with a kind of rolling eyes. I got to tell you that. We all treated it that way. I think I came in last in the bike race and did not do well in the golf either. But the fascinating thing happened at the last event is the tug of war.
Right.
On the beach. Were we approaching it, the whole thing cavalierly? Yes. Nobody was taking anything seriously until we got into the tug of war. And the weirdest thing happened. Nobody would let up. Nobody would quit. It was a real tug of war. And I remember becoming so exhausted. I was not in good shape. I became so exhausted that all I could do was put my weight on the rope. I couldn't pull anymore. Eventually, people got so exhausted so I think we won.
You did win. Yes.
I think we did win. Yes. The fascinating, think about it. You know, the human being, is that in the nature that we didn't want to give up for our teammates. Mm-hmm. We didn't want to be the cynics and let them get, you know, nobody wanted to give up. I've always looked at that as a kind of a positive, that we weren't cynical television stars, you know. We were still human beings who didn't want to disappoint our teammates, I guess.
No, I do have to ask one question from there. Like, I'm very Jewish minded. I know that you are as well. When Robert Conrad made the comment, you know, about Gabe Kaplan being Jewish and arbitrating, and he's German and wanted to kill him, did you want to deck Robert Conrad right there?
Robert Conrad was not the most beloved of television stars,
because even as a kid I cringed when he said that line. So now I want to ask about another show that you were on, you know, Black's Magic. I loved that show when I was a kid too, and it didn't last long, but it was such a fun show with you and Harry Morgan. You solved crimes.
Yes, I had a wonderful time with Harry. He was terrific. One of my failures, but then again, you know, I went through, as I said, I went through the 60s. I did 8 Broadway musicals, all of which died opening night or pre-opening night.
Mm.
So failure is a major part in most actors' existence.
Mm.
Somebody said, talking about the World Series is on, baseball is one of the hardest games to play. You know, if you fail 2 out of 3 times, you're in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
And acting is certainly failed a good deal more than I've succeeded.
Mm.
So it's something you know, that, excuse me, I'm not embarrassed by the failures. They were popular failures. They didn't succeed. The work I did was the best work I could do. So I'm not saying that I was but you get used to failure.
Mm.
You accept it. And I don't even know about all the failures, all the times that the network said, him? No, yeah, no. That's a failure too.
I thought it was a fantastic show. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun show. Thought you were great in it. You've been appearing like regularly. I mean, you still work all the time. I see you're in a lot of shows guest starring.
I got no kick.
Yes.
I got no kick.
One of the shows I wanted to ask you
did a cameo in the new Jonah Hill movie.
Oh, really?
So, yes.
When will that be out?
I have no idea.
No idea.
I never know. I may never see it. I don't know.
One of the fun ones that you guested on a couple of years ago, I saw was Supernatural. With you played a rabbit. That was a fun episode.
Rabbit, yeah.
Yeah. What do you recall about shooting that show?
That I played a rabbi. I remember
right.
with the hat and the whole thing, the whole picture. And excuse me, I caught on fire on that one. Yes, that's a rarity.
And I wanted to ask you, before you released a CD 10 years ago, and it's never too late. Any follow-up plans?
That CD took me about 40 years to complete. I started it right after Barney, or maybe even during. And the concept was I wanted to do modern numbers, new songs with a big band sound. I put together a big band, and we did a couple of four sides. It went nowhere except into my desk. About 15 years later, I was in New York, and I ran into an old friend, and we were talking about it, and we decided to go and do what they call studio sound, where you can use sound effects and whatnot. So we went into a studio and did 4 terrific tracks, also pretty much ignored. It wasn't until a lady who was booking me in concerts said, "Don't you have a CD you can sell at the end of your concert?" Go finish the goddamn thing. So out here, I went to a studio with somebody, worked up 4 more songs, and there were, I think, 10, 12 tracks on the album. No, it took 20 years for the first one. Second one will probably take 40. And I haven't got 40 left.
Any thoughts about doing a memoir? I was surprised that you hadn't. I was looking it up.
If I had the slightest bit of discipline, I would have done that. But first of all, I never thought anybody would be interested. Who gives a crap about, my memories? And yet every time a situation comes up where they asked me about George Abbott, I had 19 George Abbott stories that I would start to reel off, and they say, "God damn, would you write that down, put it in a book somewhere?"
Seriously.
It's a little too late. I can't remember names anymore, so I've forgotten half of it.
Well,
This is counts as a memoir.
okay. Well, Hal, we appreciate you being here today, and we thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure for us. I know.
I got to tell you, when my grandfather came to America,
Mm-hmm.
he had a long Russian name, and they at Ellis Island, if they, they didn't bother, they couldn't spell it, they'd open the newspaper and give you a new name.
Yes.
And that's what they did to my grandfather. It was the end of the Russo-Japanese War during the treaty, the peace treaty, and the Russian guy was Baron Rosen. And so my grandfather was named Rosen.
I was going to say, I read that your mother's maiden name was Rosen.
Yes, but it was an Ellis Island name.
Us too.
It was given by the guy at the desk.
We were changed also from I believe Rosenzweig to Rosen. So.
Well, that's a normal one. But this one was with a ski at the end, one of those long Russian names.
So we could be cousins down somewhere along the line.
We could be.
Right. But no, Hal, again, seriously, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor getting to speak with you. We were very excited to have you come on, and thrilled beyond belief. And
no,
thank you for
absolutely.
taking
And
the time.
I got to jump in and thank you for all of your amazing work. It's just, these moments for us are special because we actually get to, connect with personalities and talent like you, and just say thank you. It's been amazing to watch for a very long time. We appreciate it.
And think about it. If that piano player had not asked me, you wouldn't have a show today.
There you go. So we're the better for it.
Well, this has been Pop Culture Retro with I'm Jonathan Rosen with Ike Eisenmann. Again, special thanks to Hal Linden, and remember, please subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.